In this video, you will see how I quickly construct these simple drawings in one-point perspective, and I'll also talk about a few simple and very useful principles of freehand drawing in one-point perspective that will improve your drawings and your urban sketches a lot. In the first scene, we have a view with the interior courtyard of the famous mosque from Cordoba, Mezquita. The easiest way to start is by placing the horizon line and the vanishing point. The vanishing point is a very small area placed on the horizon line where all the lines converge and seem to meet. And as you see in this scene, the vanishing point is quite central. Now that we have the vanishing point placed on the horizon line, we can start drawing the main lines of the composition, the edges of the wall on the right, the rectangle created by the facade that is directly in front of us, the edges of the steps on the left. After we sketch these main edges, we can take each area of the composition at a time and further add elements to it. So, the lines that are converging to the vanishing point are the lines of the third dimension, the depth. Vertical edges from reality remain vertical on the drawing, and is the same for horizontal. Horizontal edges from reality also remain horizontal on the drawing. So, looking at this wall on the right, we can clearly see that it is much higher than a person, a few times higher. We can also see its beautiful Islamic arches that give a specific rhythm to the facade. These arches represent a module, a repeating module that fits inside the rectangle. The drawing process becomes much simpler if we place complex elements into simple shapes. So, I start by drawing in perspective one of these rectangular modules, and then, by using the diagonals, I can place the next modules correctly in perspective. So, what I do here is that I draw a diagonal from the lower corner of the previous module through the middle of the vertical line of the next module. And where this line intersects with the upper depth line, the one that converges to the vanishing point, is the place where the vertical edge of the next module will be. And then I repeat this process until I have enough modules sketched. So, as you see, with the help of diagonals, we now have a row of rectangles that are sketched proportionally, following the same one-point perspective. In big lines, this was the construction part of the sketch. We can now start drawing the arches. I'll start by drawing the first arch inside the initial rectangle that we've constructed in perspective. I first draw the diagonals inside the upper square to find its center. I also sketch a converging line through this intersection point because the center of all the other arches will also be placed on the same converging line. Now, I'm just drawing the arch inside this shape, and as you see, it has a specific Moorish shape. It's wider in the center, and it becomes a bit narrower on the lower sides, where it meets with the pillars. We can suggest its depth, and this depth line should be sketched horizontally. The capital of the column on which the arch rests has nice decorations, and it continues lower with the column until it meets the floor. Now I'm just continuing the same way with the rest of the arches, starting with the center by placing the diagonals, then drawing the arch inside this shape, suggesting its depth, and continuing down with the columns. We can start to notice the foreshortening effect of the perspective. We see less and less of the hole created by the arches. The last arches are so small that we don't need really to sketch them. Our eyes will fill the drawing. Hatching the inside shadow helps to better define the form of the arches. Here, above the arches, we have this beautiful corniche with many decorative elements that also seem to become smaller and smaller as they are further away from us. Here I'm sketching the upper part of the entrance that is higher. Now we can move to the frontal facade. We see the two arches and they should have the same height as the ones on the right. You see how everything relates and one element helps in sketching the next one and so on. This happens because all elements are connected between them, they are not isolated objects in space. On the left side of the courtyard, we have the orange trees. They are nicely organized following an orthogonal grid parallel with the facade, so they will also converge to the same vanishing point. I didn't stay long in Cordoba. I think it was actually just a day. Would have been really nice to have more time, but I'm very grateful that I had the chance to see this wonderful place. Looking at the ground, at the stone surface of this courtyard, we can see how the pattern also converges to the same vanishing point. As most of the constructions are rectangular or have a rectangular base form, it is very easy to spot directional lines that tell us where the vanishing point is or are depending on the type of perspective. Here I will just adjust a bit the texture of these stones. Now it's time to quickly draw a few people. I will place some small round shapes to suggest their heads and then quickly suggest their bodies. Here, I'm suggesting a few people that are further away, and as you see, I place their heads also on the horizon line but much smaller, like dots, and then their bodies also under the horizon line but smaller than the ones sketched before. Now, let's make a few persons that sit on the stairs on the left. This time, their heads have to be placed under the horizon line because they are sitting, in this way being lower than our eye level. And as final touches for this sketch, we can do a few lines that are closer to us, thicker, to better suggest depth. Also, the hatch of the stairs on the left is more intense closer to us, also to better convey depth. Here we have a nice view with the port of Malaga. I'm also starting with the horizon line, then placing the vanishing point around the left third. Then I'm adding a few lines, extending a few lines from the vanishing point, trying to match by approximation some of the main lines of the composition, like the edges of the pergola above and some of the lines of the street of the pedestrian pavement. As you see, once again, in urban scenes, there are many visible lines that help us to understand the perspective and where the vanishing point is. These lines are everywhere in the built environment. After this, I continue with suggesting the elements of the pergola in a very quick way. Then, I continue with drawing the first pillar and placing the second one, also using the diagonals as discussed in the previous drawing. It's a bit hard to notice, but on the left of the scene there is a row of palm trees that I also sketch in perspective using the diagonals. Even if they are natural elements, in this case they were having the same size and they were placed on an orthogonal grid, so it was very easy to draw them using the diagonals. Then I'll quickly suggest the texture of the street pavement by approximation, being careful to have more space between the tiles that are closer to us and less space between the tiles that are further away from us, in this way to quickly convey depth. Now it's time to draw the people in the scene, and as in the reference photo, I sketch both figures that are closer to us and figures that are further away. All of them have their head placed on the horizon line and the rest of the body under. Depending on how close or further away they are from us, from the viewer, they will be bigger or smaller shapes on the drawing. Here we are in Vienna, in an inner courtyard of the Hofburg Palace, on the other side of the street, looking directly and perpendicularly on the central facade of the building. In the upper corner, I'm doing a little sketch seen from above, a small plan. For this scene, I started a bit different. I started by drawing a rectangle that symbolizes the frontal facade, and then placed the horizon line proportionally to this facade. As you see, the facade has around 4 levels, so I placed the horizon line around the height of the first level. It should have been even lower because a person is smaller in height than a level, but it is done by approximation. Then I placed the vanishing point on the horizon line, this time around a third on the right. After this, I continue by extending lines from the vanishing point outwards to the corners of this rectangle symbolizing the facade. So now we have the other 2 facades also sketched in place. Then I quickly suggest the roof. I look at its total height compared with one level, and I notice that its height is around 2 levels. I always try to compare elements in size when sketching, because they do relate to each other, both in reality and in the drawing. Their size is relative to the other elements. This is how you can control proportions. I continue with dividing the height of the frontal facade into different levels, then with suggesting a few of the windows. The red door on the ground floor and the tower above are centrally placed on the facade, so I'll try to use diagonals to find the center and then start sketching these elements. After this, I move my attention to the facade on the right. I start by counting the levels and then suggesting them by extending lines from the vanishing point, also drawing vertical lines to start placing some of the windows. These are done by approximation, but following the principle of foreshortening in perspective, that we see more of the elements that are closer to eye and they become smaller and smaller as they are further away. Now, the sketch of the statue on the left. I start by noticing that it has a rectangular base of 2 steps. To draw this base, I use the same principle of first extending lines from the vanishing point, then drawing the horizontals to define the shape of the square in perspective. Then I start building the statue inside this square. I find its center and start placing the statue. To find the total height of the statue, I again look by comparison to the other elements in the scene. The last step is to quickly suggest some windows on the left facade. In this scene, we see the central train station from Seville. So I start with placing the horizon line and the vanishing point. Then I quickly define the main elements, the platform on the right, the area of the tracks, the plane of the wall on the right, and the general shape of the room that we see in distance. Then I suggest the columns that are placed on the right platform, the one that we are standing on. I also suggest the platform on the left, and then I start drawing the tracks. the tracks, both of them have the same width. So I start by drawing one of the tracks, and then I use the help of a small piece of paper to transfer its size to the other one. In this way, I know for sure that they will have the same size. Then I continue with extending lines from the vanishing point to suggest the length of the tracks, and also add a few more division elements, these supporters. They also help in suggesting the depth. In the next step, I focus a bit on the trains. I start by drawing in perspective simple boxes in which I build up the form of the trains. As you see, always starting from big shapes and building up more details inside these simple shapes. This is how I find the easiest way to draw. And also it helps in understanding how elements relate to each other in reality. After the trains, I focus on the left platform. I start by transferring the position of the columns from the right platform to the left one, because they should be placed on the same horizontal. And also drawing the structure of the roof having this beautiful half ellipse shape. And of course, sketching a few people to animate the place. In this last scene, again, a building from Vienna, we have a different point of view. This time we are looking up in the sky, and our viewing direction is parallel to the main facade. We are looking perpendicular to its roof. I start by placing a vanishing point outside the frame. Then I define the surface of the facade by approximation. To draw the levels, we can, again, use the help of diagonals. So I start by sketching the highest level by approximation with a simple horizontal line. Then I find the center of this line and draw a diagonal from the upper corner of the first level through the center of this line. Where it intersects with the vertical edge of the building is where the next level will be. From that point, I can again start drawing a horizontal and repeat the process until I have all the levels in place. Notice how the levels become bigger shapes as they are closer to us. As you see, the facade is quite transparent. It has this nice game of vertical pipe elements that let us see through them the lateral sides of the building. From this specific viewing angle, the depth direction that converges to the vanishing point in the drawing is actually the height of the building. And in this case, the depth from reality in one-point perspective will be sketched with vertical lines. That's why I draw the sides of the balconies with simple vertical lines. Because in one-point perspective, only one dimension is converging to one vanishing point. The other two directions, they remain lines parallel to our orthogonal grid, vertical or horizontal lines. This was the construction part of this specific drawing. Now I will start building up more details on top of this basic drawing. I start by making some of the lines thicker to better read the drawing. Then I continue with suggesting these thin pipe elements on the front facade. To do this, as you see, I am extending lines from the vanishing point and then make some of them thicker lines. I'm also suggesting the nice greenery at the balconies. And if you have a corner building situation, like in this picture over here, the way of drawing remains the same, as you can see here. I really hope this video was useful to you and that you've learned a lot about how to do simple drawings in one-point perspective, about how to start constructing your scene with simple shapes and then build on top of them. Even if you prefer painting to sketching, drawing is a basic skill that will help you improve as an artist. Let me know in a comment below if this video was useful to you and if you have further questions or suggestions for future videos. On the channel, besides all the urban sketching and watercolor painting videos, I also have an introduction to perspective video and a technical one-point perspective video. Take care and see you in the next video.